David never thought of himself as special. He was just a regular guy who worked with computers all day, fixing problems and writing code. His life was simple and quiet. He went to work, came home to a small apartment, and spent evenings watching shows or reading books. He liked it this way. No drama, no surprises, no complications. But sometimes life has other plans. It was a Thursday evening when his coworker, Jake, practically dragged him to an art show downtown. Jake had been talking about it for weeks, saying there would be interesting people there and maybe some good food. David wasn't really into art, but Jake wouldn't stop asking, so he finally said yes just to end the conversation. The gallery was crowded and noisy. People stood around holding wine glasses, talking loudly about paintings David didn't understand. He felt out of place in his simple button-down shirt, while everyone else seemed dressed for something much fancier. He was already planning his escape when he saw her. She was standing alone in front of a large painting that showed what looked like swirling stars and planets. Unlike everyone else who was chatting and laughing, she stood perfectly still, just looking at the artwork like it was telling her a story only she could hear. There was something peaceful about her that made David curious. The woman had long dark hair and was wearing a simple white dress that somehow looked elegant without being fancy. But it wasn't how she looked that caught his attention. It was the way she carried herself, like she knew something the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. David found himself walking over to where she stood, not really sure why. He usually avoided talking to strangers, especially at events like this, where he felt completely out of his element. Something about her presence felt calming, like standing near a warm fire on a cold day. "It's beautiful," he said, looking at the painting and immediately feeling foolish for such a simple comment. She turned to look at him with eyes that seemed much older than her face suggested. When she smiled, it was gentle and genuine, not the polite fake smile people usually gave strangers. "It reminds me of home," she said softly. Turning back to the painting, David looked at the swirling colors and cosmic scene again. "You're from space?" he asked, trying to make a joke. She laughed, and the sound was like music. "Something like that," she said, and David couldn't tell if she was joking back or being serious. They stood there together for a few minutes, just looking at the painting. David usually felt awkward in silences, always feeling like he needed to fill them with words, but this felt different. The quiet between them was comfortable, like they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. "I'm David," he finally said. "Luna," she replied, and somehow the name fit her perfectly. They started talking, and David was surprised by how easy it felt. Luna asked him about his work. Instead of giving his usual boring explanation about computer programming, he found himself talking about how he liked solving puzzles and fixing things that were broken. She listened like his job was the most interesting thing in the world. When he asked what she did, Luna paused for a moment. "I help people find connections," she said. "I work with a community that believes everything in the universe is linked together in ways most people don't see." David nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what she meant. It sounded like some kind of spiritual or therapy work. He'd never been into that kind of thing, but when Luna talked about it, it didn't sound silly or fake like it usually did when other people discussed similar topics. As the evening went on, they moved away from the crowded main room to a quieter corner where they could talk without shouting over the noise. Luna told him about growing up in a small community where people valued different things than most of society. She spoke about energy between people, about how some individuals could sense things others couldn't, and about the importance of genuine connection in a world that seemed increasingly isolated. David found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. He talked about feeling disconnected from most people, about going through life feeling like he was watching from the outside, about wondering if there was more to existence than just work and sleep and routine. "There is more," Luna said with such certainty that David almost believed her. "Much more. Most people just don't know how to see it." When she said things like that, her eyes seemed to get brighter, like she was seeing something wonderful that was invisible to everyone else. David wanted to see whatever she was seeing. The gallery was starting to empty out, and Jake appeared to let David know he was ready to leave. David realized he'd been talking to Luna for over 2 hours, and it It felt like minutes. "Can I see you again?" he asked, feeling like a teenager asking someone to prom. Luna smiled and pulled out her phone. As they exchanged numbers, her fingers briefly touched his hand, and David felt a strange warmth spread up his arm. It was probably nothing, just his imagination, but it felt significant somehow. "I'd like that very much," she said. "But David, I should tell you something. The community, the people I work with, we're different from most others. If we become friends, really become friends, it might change how you see the world." David looked into her eyes and saw she was completely serious. Part of him wanted to ask what she meant, but another part of him was afraid the explanation might sound crazy and ruin whatever was happening between them. "I think I'd like that," he said instead. Luna's smile grew wider. "We'll see," she said. Softly after she left, David stood in the empty gallery for a few more minutes, just looking at the painting where he'd first seen her. The swirling stars and planets seemed different now. It was more alive somehow, like they were moving even though he knew they weren't. On the drive home, Jake kept asking about the mysterious woman in white, but David found it hard to explain what had happened. How could he tell someone that a simple conversation had made him feel more awake than he'd felt in years? How could he describe the feeling that his ordinary life had just been touched by something extraordinary? That night, David lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of their conversation. He thought about Luna's warning that knowing her might change how he saw the world. The smart thing would probably be to let it go, to stick with his safe, predictable life. But as he drifted off to sleep, David knew he was going to call her. Whatever Luna was offering, whatever door she was opening, he wanted to walk through it. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like something amazing was about to happen. He just had no idea how right he was. David called Luna 3 days later. He'd been thinking about her constantly since the art gallery, but he didn't want to seem too eager. When she answered, her voice had that same calm quality he remembered, like she'd been expecting his call. They met for coffee at a small cafe downtown. David arrived early and sat by the window, watching people walk by on the street. When Luna walked in, she seemed to glide rather than walk, and David noticed other people in the cafe turning to look at her. Not because she was trying to get attention, but because there was something about her presence that naturally drew people's eyes. "How was your week?" she asked as she sat down across from him. "Better now," David said, then immediately felt embarrassed for being so direct. Luna smiled. "You're honest. I like that about you." They talked easily, just like at the gallery. Luna asked about his work, his family, his dreams. David found himself telling her things he'd never shared with anyone, not even his closest friends. A way of listening that made him feel like his words actually mattered. When he asked about her work again, Luna's expression became more serious. "I told you I help people find connections," she said. "But I didn't explain what kind of connections." David leaned forward, curious. "My community. We call ourselves the Awakened," Luna continued. "We believe that most people are living only half awake. They go through life missing the deeper currents that flow between all living things." David nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood. "Like meditation or religion?" "Not exactly," Luna said, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "It's more about awareness. Some people are born with the ability to sense things others can't. We can feel the energy that connects all life. We can sense what others are feeling, sometimes before they know it themselves." As she spoke, David realized that Luna had been doing exactly that with him. She seemed to know when he was nervous, when he was excited, when he was confused, all, without him saying a word. "Is that what you were doing with me?" he asked. Luna looked into his eyes. "Yes, from the moment we met, I could feel your loneliness, but also your kindness, your desire for something real in a world full of fake connections." David felt exposed, like she could see right through him. Should have been scary, but instead, it felt like relief. Someone finally understood him without him having to explain himself. Over the next few weeks, they met regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks in the park, sometimes just to sit together and watch the sunset. Luna gradually shared more about her community and their beliefs. She told him about growing up in a place where children were taught to feel the energy around them before they learned to read, where people valued emotional honesty above everything else, where forming deep connections with others was considered the most important thing a person could do. "We don't form connections lightly," Luna explained one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking the lake. "Among my people, true connection is sacred. It's not something casual or temporary." "What do you mean by true connection?" David asked Luna. It was quiet for a long moment, watching the water ripple in the breeze. "It means sharing your complete self with another person. Not just the parts you want them to see, but everything. Your fears, your dreams, your deepest thoughts. It means trusting someone with your spirit, your essence." David felt his heart beating faster. "And that's sacred to your people." "The most sacred thing there is," Luna said softly. "Because when two people truly connect like that, they become responsible for each other's spiritual well-being. It creates a bond that we believe lasts beyond this lifetime." The idea was both beautiful and terrifying to David. He'd never experienced anything close to that level of connection with another person. Most of his relationships had been surface level, built on shared interests or convenience rather than deep understanding. "Have you ever," David started, then stopped, not sure how to ask the question, "shared that kind of connection?" "Yes, once before," Luna said. But he wasn't ready for what it meant. The depth scared him, and he pulled away. It was painful for both of us. David could hear the sadness in her voice, and he felt a strange protectiveness toward her. The idea that someone had hurt her by rejecting such a gift made him angry. As their friendship deepened, David began to notice changes in himself. He felt more aware of the people around him, more sensitive to their moods and feelings. He would wake up from dreams that felt more real than his waking life. Dreams where he and Luna were walking through landscapes that didn't exist on any map. One evening, Luna brought him to meet some of her community. They gathered in a small house on the outskirts of town, about 8 people sitting in a circle in a candlelit room. David expected it to feel like a cult meeting or some weird ceremony, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The group welcomed him warmly, but he could sense they were studying him, trying to understand what Luna saw in him. They spoke about energy and connection, like other people talked about the weather, casually mentioning things that would have sounded impossible to David just a few months earlier. One woman, older than the others, with silver hair and kind eyes, looked directly at David. "Luna has told us about you," she said. "She believes you have the potential to awaken." "What does that mean?" David asked. "It means seeing the world as it really is, not just as we've been taught to see it," the woman replied. "It means learning to feel the connections that bind all life together." David looked at Luna, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was hope in her eyes, but also something that looked like fear. After the gathering, as they walked back to David's car, Luna was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" David asked. Luna stopped walking and turned to face him. "My community doesn't usually welcome outsiders," she said. "We're very careful about who we choose to share our deeper teachings with." "Why?" David asked, though he was starting to understand the answer. "Because once you truly awaken, once you experience real connection, there's no going back to the way things were," Luna said. "Your old life, your old way of seeing the world, it will never be enough again." David felt a chill run down his spine, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. "Luna," he said carefully, "are you considering sharing that kind of connection with me?" She looked at him for a long moment, and David could see her internal struggle. Finally, she nodded. "I've been thinking about it for weeks," she admitted. "But David, you need to understand what you'd be accepting. This isn't just about friendship or even love as most people understand it. This is about soul-deep connection that will change everything about who you are." David reached out and took her hand, feeling that same warm energy he'd noticed when they first met. This time, he was sure it wasn't his imagination. "Maybe I'm ready to change," he said. Luna squeezed his hand gently. "We'll see," she said, but this time when she said it, David heard promise instead of doubt as they drove home through the quiet streets. David realized his ordinary life was already becoming something extraordinary. The only question now was whether he had the courage to embrace what Luna was offering. or if he would be like the person before him, who had run away when things got too deep. Looking at Luna's peaceful face in the soft glow of the dashboard lights, David knew he wouldn't run. Whatever she was willing to share with him, whatever sacred gift she was considering, he wanted to be worthy of it. He just hoped he was strong enough for what came next. 3 weeks passed before Luna brought up the sacred connection again. During that time, David felt like he was living in two different worlds. During the day, he went to his regular job, sat in meetings, and wrote computer code just like always. But in the evenings with Luna, he experienced things that challenged everything he thought he knew about reality. She taught him simple meditation techniques that helped him feel the energy she talked about. At first, David thought he was imagining things. But gradually, he began to sense the subtle currents flowing between people. The way emotions seemed to ripple through crowds, the connections that linked all living things. One evening, Luna invited him to dinner at her home. It was a small house surrounded by a garden full of plants David had never seen before. The inside felt peaceful and warm, with soft lighting and the gentle sound of wind chimes. "There's something I need to tell you," Luna said as they finished eating. Her voice was serious, and David could feel tension radiating from her. "What is it?" David asked, setting down his fork. "I've made a decision about sharing the sacred connection with you," she said. "But before I can do that, you need to meet the council. The council, the elders of my community. They guide us in important decisions, especially ones that involve bringing outsiders into our deepest practices." David felt his stomach tighten. "And they need to approve me?" Luna nodded. "It's not personal, David. It's just that what I'm offering you is so precious to us. If something went wrong, if you couldn't handle it, or if you used it carelessly, it could damage not just you and me, but our entire community." The next evening, Luna took him to a house he'd never seen before. It was larger than the others, set back from the road and surrounded by tall trees. Inside, 5 people sat in comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. David recognized the silver-haired woman from the previous gathering, but the others were new to him. They invited David to sit in the center of the circle. Felt like being on trial, except everyone's faces were kind and patient rather than judgmental. "Luna has told us she wishes to share sacred connection with you," said an older man with gentle eyes. "Do you understand what this means?" David took a deep breath. "I'm beginning to. It means she would trust me with her deepest self, and I would need to do the same with her." "More than that," said another woman, "it means you would become responsible for each other's spiritual well-being. In our understanding, such bonds connect souls across lifetimes." A younger man leaned forward. "David, what do you hope to gain from this connection?" The question caught David off guard. He'd been so focused on the honor of being chosen that he hadn't really examined his own motivations. "Hope to gain anything," he said slowly. "I just know that since I met Luna, I feel more alive than I ever have before. Like I was sleepwalking through life until now." "And what are you willing to give?" asked the silver-haired woman, David thought. About his comfortable, predictable life. His routine job, his quiet apartment, his safe distance from anything that might hurt him. "Everything," he said, surprising himself with how quickly the answer came. "I'm willing to give everything." The council members exchanged glances. David could feel them communicating in ways he couldn't perceive yet, sharing thoughts and impressions through the energy connections Luna had taught him about. "You understand that accepting this gift changes you permanently?" the older man asked. "There's no going back to who you were before." "I don't want to go back," David said. That person was half asleep. After what felt like hours of questions, the council asked David to wait outside while they discussed. He sat on the front porch, listening to the night sounds and wondering if he'd said the right things. Luna came out after 20 minutes and sat beside him. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Nervous, excited, scared," David admitted. "What happens if they say no?" "Then we remain friends, but nothing more," Luna said softly. "The sacred connection isn't something I can share against their wisdom." David felt a sharp pang of loss at the thought. In just a few months, the possibility of deeper connection with Luna had become the most important thing in his life. The door opened, and the silver-haired woman gestured for them to come back inside. "David," she said once they were seated again, "we've reached a decision." But first, we want you to understand the full weight of what Luna is offering. She explained that in their community's history, only a handful of outsiders had ever been chosen for sacred connection. Of those, some had thrived and become valuable members of their community. Others had been overwhelmed by the intensity and had to be gently separated from their connections to preserve their sanity. One man many years ago tried to use what he learned for personal gain, the older man added. He attempted to manipulate others using the energy techniques we taught him. The damage to our community took years to heal. David felt the weight of their trust settling on his shoulders. What happened to him? The connections were severed, Luna said quietly. But it's painful for everyone involved. Woman smiled. We believe you're ready, she said, but we want you to take one more week to consider. Go home. Think about your life. Make sure this is truly what you want. If you still feel the same way in 7 days, Luna has our blessing to share the sacred connection with you. David wanted to say he didn't need time to think, that he was certain of his choice. But he could see the wisdom in their request. This decision would affect the rest of his life. That week was the longest of David's life. He went through his daily routine, but everything felt different. His apartment seemed smaller and more cramped. His coworkers' conversations felt shallow and meaningless. Even his favorite foods tasted bland. He found himself standing in front of mirrors, studying his reflection and trying to imagine who he might become after sharing sacred connection with Luna. The person looking back at him seemed like a stranger. Already, someone whose ordinary life no longer fit. On the 4th day, his brother called to invite him to a family barbecue. David sat in his parents' backyard, watching his relatives laugh and talk about sports and work and neighborhood gossip. They were good people, and he loved them, but he felt like he was observing them from behind glass. You seem different lately, his mother said, sitting down beside him. Happier, but also ... distant. David looked at her kind face and wished he could explain what was happening to him. But how could he tell her he was about to enter a world she couldn't even imagine? I think I'm changing, Mom, he said finally. Is it because of that woman you've been seeing, Luna? David nodded. His mother was quiet for a moment, then patted his hand. As long as she makes you happy, she said, just promise me you'll be careful. By the 7th day, David was more certain than ever. Whatever risks came with accepting Luna's gift, the risk of missing this opportunity felt far greater. He called Luna that morning. I don't need any more time, he told her. I want this. I want to share that connection with you. You could hear the smile in her voice. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Luna was quiet for a moment. Then come to my house tonight. Bring only yourself and an open heart. As David hung up the phone, he felt a mixture of excitement and terror unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Just a few hours, his ordinary life would end forever. In order, not because he expected anything bad to happen, but because he sensed the person who woke up tomorrow would be fundamentally different from the person going to sleep tonight. As evening approached, David stood in front of his mirror one last time, saying goodbye to the man he'd been for 32 years. Then he walked out into the gathering darkness, toward Luna's house, and whatever transformation awaited him there. David arrived at Luna's house just as the sun was setting. The garden looked different in the twilight, more mysterious and alive. Every flower seemed to glow with its own inner light, and the air hummed with an energy he could now sense clearly. Luna met him at the door wearing a simple white dress, her hair flowing loose around her shoulders. Her eyes held a depth of emotion David had never seen before, excitement mixed with nervousness, joy touched with something that looked almost like fear. Are you ready? She asked softly. David nodded, though his heart was beating so fast he wondered if she could hear it. I think so. What exactly happens now? Luna took his hand and led him into her living room. She had rearranged the furniture, creating an open space in the center with soft cushions on the floor. Candles flickered around the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. First, we need to prepare our minds and hearts, Luna explained as they sat facing each other on the cushions. The sacred connection isn't just about sharing thoughts or feelings. It's about opening your very soul to another person. She guided him through breathing exercises that seemed to slow down time itself. David felt his everyday worries and anxieties melting away, replaced by a sense of profound calm. The boundaries between himself and the room around him began to blur. "Now," Luna said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm going to show you who I really am. Not just the person you've gotten to know over these past months, but my complete self. My fears, my dreams, my deepest memories, everything." David felt a tingling sensation in his mind, like something was gently opening doors he didn't even know existed. Suddenly, he wasn't just sitting in Luna's living room anymore. He was experiencing her childhood running through fields of flowers that seemed to sing in the wind, learning to feel the emotions of animals and plants, discovering that the world was full of connections invisible to most people. He felt her loneliness when she realized she was different from other children, her struggle to fit into a world that couldn't see what she could see. He experienced her joy when she found her community, people who understood her gifts and helped her develop them. But it wasn't just memories. David could feel Luna's emotions as if they were his own. Her deep compassion for all living things. Her constant awareness of the pain and beauty flowing through the world around her. Her careful guardedness born from being hurt by people who couldn't understand her nature. Most powerfully, he felt her love for him, not just romantic attraction, but a recognition that went deeper than personality or physical form. She saw something in his soul that resonated with hers, a harmony that existed beyond the surface details of their separate lives. The experience was overwhelming. David felt tears streaming down his face, though he couldn't tell if they were from joy or the sheer intensity of feeling so much at once. "Your turn," Luna whispered. And David realized she was crying too. David had never been good at expressing his emotions. But somehow the barriers in his mind had dissolved. Without conscious effort, he found himself sharing everything with Luna. His childhood feelings of never quite belonging anywhere. His deep longing for authentic connection in a world full of surface relationships. Luna experienced his memories of sitting alone in his apartment, wondering if this was all there was to existence. She felt his amazement when he first met her. The way she had awakened something in him he didn't even know was sleeping. But the most surprising thing was what Luna reflected back to him. Through her perception, David saw himself not as the ordinary, unremarkable person he'd always believed himself to be, but as someone with tremendous capacity for love, growth, and spiritual awareness. She showed him his own potential, the person he could become. As their souls intertwined, David felt himself expanding beyond the boundaries of his individual self. He was still David, but he was also part of something larger, connected not just to Luna, but to the web of life that surrounded them. He could sense the plants in Luna's garden, small animals moving through the night, even the people sleeping in houses throughout the neighborhood. The experience lasted hours, though it felt like both moments and lifetimes. When they finally returned to normal awareness, David found himself lying on the cushions with Luna beside him, both of them exhausted but profoundly changed. "How do you feel?" Luna asked, her voice hoarse from the intensity of what they'd shared. David tried to find words for the experience. "Like I've been blind my whole life and can suddenly see," he said finally. "Like I was living in black and white, and now everything is in color." Luna smiled, though David could sense her concern beneath the happiness. "It can be overwhelming at first. The world will look different to you now. You'll see things you never noticed before, feel things more deeply than you're used to." Over the following days, David discovered she was right. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more musical. Even the air itself felt alive against his skin. He could sense the emotions of people around him, feel the energy flowing between all living things. But it wasn't always pleasant. Walking through the city, David was bombarded by the pain and loneliness of strangers. The suffering of homeless people hit him like physical blows. The casual cruelty in everyday interactions that he'd never noticed before now felt like daggers to his heart. Luna helped him learn to manage these new perceptions. She taught him how to create barriers when the input became too much, how to send healing energy to those who were suffering,
Ow.
how to find balance between empathy and self-preservation. This is why we're so careful about who we share this gift with, she explained as they walked through a park. If it's still adjusting to the constant flow of sensory and emotional information, some people can't handle feeling this much. They either shut down completely or become so overwhelmed they lose touch with reality. David understood now why the council had been so cautious, why they'd wanted him to think carefully before accepting this transformation. His old life felt impossibly distant, like something he'd read about in a book rather than actually lived. The most profound change was in his relationship with Luna. They didn't just love each other now, they were connected at a level that made traditional relationship terms seem inadequate. When she was sad, he felt it in his own heart. When he was excited about something, she experienced his joy as her own. Sometimes the intensity frightened him. During their first argument after the connection about something trivial, David couldn't even remember later. The pain they caused each other was magnified tenfold by their bond. They both felt the hurt from both sides simultaneously, creating a feedback loop of emotion that left them both shaken. This is why sacred connections require such maturity, Luna said afterward as they held each other, both still trembling from the experience. When you can feel each other's pain this directly, you learn very quickly to be kind. But the beautiful moments were equally magnified. When they watched a sunset together, David experienced not only his own wonder, but Luna's as well, creating a cascade of joy that seemed to light up the world around them. When they shared quiet moments in her garden, their combined awareness created a bubble of peace that attracted birds and butterflies, as if the natural world could sense their harmony. 3 months after their sacred connection, David realized he could no longer remember exactly what his old life had felt like. He knew the facts of it, but the emotional reality of living in that smaller, more limited way was impossible to recapture. He'd found what he'd been searching for without even knowing he was searching. But he was also beginning to understand that this was just the beginning of his transformation, not the end of it. The sacred connection had opened doors in his consciousness that would take years to fully explore. Looking at Luna as she tended her impossible garden, David felt a gratitude so deep it seemed to flow through his entire being. She had given him the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to become who he was truly meant to be. But he was also beginning to understand that gifts of this magnitude came with equally great responsibilities. The real test wouldn't be whether he could handle the connection itself, but what he would do with the person it was helping him become. 1 year after the sacred connection, David barely recognized the man he used to be. He still worked with computers, but now he designed programs that helped people connect with each other in meaningful ways. His small apartment had been transformed into a space filled with plants, crystals, and artwork that seemed to pulse with the same energy he'd learned to see everywhere. The changes went far deeper than his living space. David moved through the world with a confidence and awareness that drew people to him. Strangers would start conversations with him on the street, sharing their deepest concerns as if they instinctively knew he would understand. His coworkers began coming to him for advice about their relationships and life decisions. At first, this attention had been overwhelming. David wasn't used to being the person others turned to for guidance, but Luna helped him understand that his new awareness came with the responsibility to help others when he could. "You're becoming a bridge," she explained, as they sat in her garden one evening, watching the stars emerge. "Someone who can speak both languages, the ordinary world and the awakened one." Luna's community had fully accepted David now. The elders, who had once questioned his readiness, now sought his input on how to help other outsiders understand their ways. His perspective as someone who had lived in both worlds made him valuable in ways he was still discovering, but perhaps the most significant change was in his relationship with Luna herself. Their bond had deepened beyond anything either of them had experienced before. They could communicate without words, share dreams across distances, and sense each other's needs before they were even expressed. This connection had also taught them both about the true meaning of love. It wasn't about possession or even romance in the traditional sense. It was about supporting each other's growth, celebrating each other's gifts, holding space for each other's struggles. One evening, Luna came home from a gathering with the council looking troubled. David felt her distress the moment she walked through the door, even before he saw her face. "What happened?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "There's another outsider," she said quietly. "A woman named River who's been coming to our public gatherings. The council thinks she might be ready for deeper teachings." David felt a stab of something that took him a moment to identify. Jealousy? Possessiveness? The emotions surprised him. "You're worried I'll feel threatened," Luna said, reading his emotions as easily as she always did. "Maybe a little," David admitted. "Does that make me terrible?" Luna smiled and touched his face gently. "It makes you human. But David, what we've built together, it's not diminished by sharing our gifts with others. If anything, it grows stronger." Over the following months, David watched Luna guide River through the same journey he'd taken. He saw his own transformation reflected in her gradual awakening, her amazement at discovering abilities she never knew she had, her struggle to integrate expanded awareness with everyday life. To his surprise, instead of feeling jealous, David found himself wanting to help. He understood the challenges River was facing in ways that even Luna couldn't, because he remembered what it felt like to be completely ordinary before awakening to these new possibilities. "She's scared," David told Luna after spending an evening talking with River about her experiences. "She keeps thinking she's going crazy." "What did you tell her?" Luna asked. "That crazy is just what we call experiences we don't understand yet, and that she's not alone." David began working with other newcomers to Luna's community, helping them navigate the transition from ordinary awareness to expanded consciousness. He discovered he had a gift for explaining complex spiritual concepts in simple, practical terms that didn't scare people away. His old friends and family noticed the changes in him too, though they couldn't identify exactly what was different. His brother mentioned that David seemed more present when they talked. His mother said he'd developed an old soul quality that made her feel peaceful just being around him. David's work life transformed as well. His boss noticed his improved ability to understand what clients really needed, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. His projects became more successful because he could sense the underlying dynamics in teams and help resolve conflicts before they exploded. But the most profound realization came to David gradually over many months. The sacred connection with Luna hadn't just changed his ability to perceive energy or feel emotions more deeply. It had fundamentally altered his understanding of what it meant to be human. He now saw every person as part of an interconnected web of consciousness, each individual carrying their own piece of a larger puzzle. Loneliness, which had once defined so much of his existence, now seemed impossible because he could feel his connection to all life. This shift in perspective changed everything about how David approached relationships, work, and daily life. Instead of seeing interactions as transactions or competitions, he began to see them as opportunities for mutual growth and understanding. One evening, as David and Luna sat together watching the sunset from her garden, she turned to him with a question that had been building for months. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing this path? Leaving your old life behind?" David considered the question seriously. His life was certainly more complex now, more emotionally intense, more demanding in ways his former self couldn't have imagined. But regret? How can you regret becoming who you were always meant to be? He said finally. "It's like asking if I regret learning to see after being born blind." Luna smiled, but David could sense deeper currents in her question. "What is it really?" he asked. "Sometimes I wonder if I had the right to change you so completely," she admitted. "You didn't know what you were accepting when you said yes." David took her hands in his, feeling the familiar warmth of energy flowing between them. "Luna, you didn't change me. You helped me remember who I already was underneath all the conditioning and fear. The person I am now was always there, just waiting to wake up." As they sat together in comfortable silence, David reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he'd been sleepwalking through life, going through the motions of existence without really living. Now, every day brought new discoveries, deeper connections, and opportunities to help others find their own path to awakening. He thought about River and the other newcomers he'd worked with, watching them gradually shed their old limitations and step into their authentic power. Each person who awakened made the world a little brighter, a little more connected, a little more capable of the love and understanding humanity desperately needed. David realized that Luna's gift to him had been just the beginning. The sacred connection they shared was meant to ripple outward, creating new connections that would create more connections, gradually weaving a web of awakened consciousness that could transform the world. Looking at Luna, her face peaceful in the fading light, David felt a gratitude so profound it seemed to encompass his entire existence. She had chosen him not just for love, but for partnership in something much larger than their individual happiness. The ordinary man who had stumbled into an art gallery 18 months ago was gone forever. In his place sat someone who understood that being chosen for sacred connection wasn't just an honor, it was a calling to help others discover the same possibilities within themselves. As the stars began to appear overhead, David made a silent promise to use his gifts wisely, to honor the trust Luna and her community had placed in him, and to help create a world where sacred connections were not rare exceptions, but the natural way human beings related to each other. The transformation was complete. But the real work was just beginning, and David had never been more excited about what tomorrow might bring.